Hello, everyone watching and listening. Good morning from France this time, and welcome back to the Free Radical Podcast episode number 11. So, this is your host, Swami Padmanabha. I'm here today, honored and thrilled to be in the company of a new friend and spiritual accomplice, I will say, and also Sufi practitioner, scholar, sculptor, and very sweet human being for what I can tell you. Patrick Beldio. So, Patrick, thank you so much for joining.
What a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me as your guest. I look forward to it.
Thank you, Patrick. So, let me share a few words regarding Patrick's bio before we start officially. So, Patrick Beldio is a scholar of comparative religion and theology. Some of his areas of academic research and teaching are interreligious studies, comparative theology, Hindu Christian relations, interfaith dialogue, religion and visual culture, religion and gender, with a focus on Franciscan spirituality, the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo Ashram, and Meher Bab, and the Christie lineage in the West. He has also volunteered with many service projects, including Francis in the Schools, which provides material, psychological, and spiritual support to children on the margins. Patrick currently teaches at the University of Scranton in the Theology and Religion department, and he is a professional sacred sculptor with a studio at the Franciscan Monastery in Washington, D.C. His sculptures are in private and public collection across the USA. So, here to begin with, I share a brief link for those who would like to know more about Patrick's work, both scholarly and his art presentations. So, you have the link for those who are only listening. The link is reunionstudios.com. So, personally, regarding how I got to meet Patrick Beldio, I think I came to know about Patrick from another common friend of us and scholar, Jeffrey Long, from whom I came to know. He endorsed my first book, Jeffrey. So I came to know Jeffrey from my first book, and then we continue in touch. And recently, sharing some words about my second book, Radical Personalism, to Jeffrey, and especially some points in the book on theological cross-pollination, Jeff recommended that I contact Patrick. And so Jeff was kind enough to organize a Zoom call where the three of us met and shared very beautifully. And simultaneously, interesting at that time, Patrick, you may remind, you were invited to Ilia Delia's podcast. And
Yes.
after you, I was the next guest to her podcast. So there was too much synchronicity to not pay attention to that. So in that way, I
Yeah.
also listened to the podcast. I came to know more about Patrick, and of course, I look forward to continue knowing
Yeah.
more about him today.
Me too.
So yeah, today, well, as you may know, this Free Radical podcast somehow revolves considerably around the contents of my recent book, Radical Personalism. So I always love to begin these episodes by asking every guest whether they know about my book or not, but to share a few words about what the term radical personalism means to you in this case. So please enlighten me,
Mm.
Patrick.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's such a beautiful question. Um, I look forward to learning from you, actually. I guess because I've just begun to read your work and understand the kind of perspective you're bringing. Um, but I guess when I hear that, I kind of think about um, both the tradition of Sri Aurobindo and the mother, and
Mm,
the way in which they think about the person.
mm,
And then I also think about my Sufi practice and the Sufi tradition I belong to, and Meher Baba and his teachings about really, I guess the growth of all of the universe is really one of personal growth, or the individuation of the soul through different
mhm,
forms, first through evolution, then through reincarnation, then through a spiritual path that leads back to the one true person.
mm,
And I think we're living in a time, and I think you write about this beautifully, in which the yogas and the spiritual practices, monastic practices in the West, maybe the approach was to ascend, the
Hmm.
planes of consciousness to unite
Mhm.
kind of more and more with different levels of consciousness to achieve finally either a monistic union or a union in difference, or however one sort of experiences that, um, and that this union sort of maintains a transcendence above the body and the earth. And you write so beautifully about, no, there's that, maybe that could be a place to begin. But what if we were to bring down the accomplishment, the beauty, that the truth, the love down into our bodies from those planes of consciousness and into the earth to
Hmm.
affect a real change individually and socially, and also cosmically, at the material level, to so there's a descent of consciousness that happens, that's possible maybe now in a way that you're talking about. At least that's how the Sri Aurobindo Ashram talks about it. That's how Meher Baba talks about it, that we're living in a time that it's possible to manifest the spirit in our bodies in a way that's unique and lovely and beautiful, and so to become a radical, I don't know, radical personality, radical personalism means to me, I guess, in this new time, a bringing together of matter and spirit that
Hmm.
has not been possible before.
Hmm.
Maybe people individually have accomplished, but at a communal level, at a global level, um, where we're both honoring the individual sort of localized in personalities of people and groups, but also honoring the radical unity that underneath the river Abajo, or underneath
Mhm.
everything, is flowing.
Hmm.
So those are initial thoughts, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That doesn't sound initial at all. Pretty elaborate thing, and I appreciate your point of on how there is some. I agree. There's some type of zeitgeist in nowadays that it's inviting us to reach that, not so much on an individual level alone, but on a collective one, like maybe it has never happened before. So
Hmm.
yeah, I feel very thrilled and excited to somehow be part of that uh, generational invitation, if you will. No?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
thank you so much for the idea on your version of radical personalism. I'm always humbled and enlightened by receiving every guest and every person that I meet that they know about the idea. I tell them, tell me what's radical
Ah,
personalism for you, and there's always overwhelmingly astonishing and beautiful. So thank you.
mm, mm.
So today's topic with Patrick, the title of today's episode is Mystery as a Living Art, and somehow we chose that title since on one side Patrick is a very talented artist, as you will see in his website, if you will, and the word therefore the word art in our title connects in one way there, but
Yeah.
also Patrick is a scholar and practitioner who embraces uh, mystical traditions such as Sufism or also Hinduism and Christianity. So, in connection to the mystical side, we have the word mystery, which is very connected to the notion of mystical. So, putting all this together, mysticism, mystery, and art, our idea was to speak not merely about art, but also about mystery as not merely an art, but a living art. No, so
Mm,
I
mm.
think the word living also adds to the equation. So let me read a few seconds the particular corresponding section from the book from Radical Personalism in connection to this, which will it's found for those who have the printed version in pages 127 and 128. And the section is called Radical Unknowing, which is a section so important that I consider to make a whole separate chapter in the book, chapter 12. So it says like this. In general, present day Gaudiya Vaishnavism seems to be stuck in what we may call an overdose of confidence or a profound inability to deal with uncertainty, liminality, and paradox, all of which create a necessary displacement from our comfort zone. Instead of discarding mystery by claiming a perfect understanding, we are invited to harmonize and include all contradictions and dilemmas in higher synthesis as part of our inner project. We call this Radical Unknowing. Mhm. So this above section, and again, the whole separate chapter that I wrote about inspired for today's episode, Mystery as a Living Art. So I don't know, Patrick, if you have any ideas that you would like to share as a kickstart
Sure.
to come after what we just read.
Ah, it's interesting because just yesterday, so as you mentioned, I'm teaching at the University of Scranton, and just yesterday I was teaching in one of my classes. It's on the Introduction to Catholic Theology,
Mm.
and I had them read something on Karl Rahner, who you may
Mhm.
know,
Yeah.
very important 20th century, Catholic theologian, Jesuit, and we were reading a section about what he said about mystery, holy mystery. He called it holy mystery.
Hmm.
And I wanted my students to understand how radical this notion was in the Catholic Church, especially when he was writing in the 1960s during
Mhm.
Vatican II and the great changes happening with the Catholic Church then. That he was really explaining that we really do have to go into a radical unknowing. We really do have to let go of a certitude that is the very opposition to real faith, the
Hmm.
opposition to real love and hope.
Hmm.
That to let go of our certainty and to be courageous enough to enter the darkness of unknowing that really the divine is always asking us to, inviting us into. And certainly in the Catholic tradition, Jesus is inviting so wonderfully through difficult. But I think we all don't want to be invited. We don't want to kind of receive the invitation because it means picking up our cross in the language of Christianity, of picking up those places of opposition within us and in the world that it'd be safe just not to deal with,
Mhm.
and our mind wouldn't be able to control them. But our mind wants to control them, wants certainty, wants to plan, and wants to know beforehand how it's going to all turn out.
Yeah.
And so I think he was just that. So my students and I were discussing some of this. A lot of them really come from Catholic backgrounds where they were told all the right answers
Hmm.
and really aren't, it's not a living experience
Hmm.
of knowledge, a radical, and where they've been pushed. So I'm inviting them to sort of embrace their own darkness, their own oppositions in life, so that they would be for themselves discover on the other side an incredible embrace.
Hmm.
So we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm challenging them.
Wow, sounds exciting. I would like to be a student in your class, Patrick. I'm so envious of your students. And yeah, since you mentioned Karl Rahner, I remember I quoted him in my book when he says, like, the Christian of the future will be a mystic or will not be at all.
That's the best. I think
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah. So that's
Yeah.
that's that's so important. It sounds like extreme, but actually it's what provides real sustainability for us as individuals and as a collective to enter into the mystery and be willing to coexist with that we cannot control, basically.
Yeah.
And something that comes to mind, because okay, today we'll be talking mostly about mystery as an art, but you are an artist. I personally consider myself some form of artist. I'm a musician and I'm a writer, and
Yeah.
I learned some drawing and so on.
Ah.
Not to compare myself to you at all, but but
Ah.
somehow I feel identified with that designation, so to say. So my point is, okay, we will speak about mystery and art, but also we can share, if you want, some words about art as mystery as well. No, because for me, art, how to say,
Ooh.
uh, for me, the unknown shines through the productions of great artists, so to say.
Mm.
No? Or for me, the real artist is always articulating, so to say, what lies in the unknown, what lies outside of the comfort zone. An actual
Yeah.
artist is someone who is willing to adventure into that area, and as I like to put in my book, they transform chaos into order. No, they
Yeah.
make that unknown intelligible for us. No, maybe how to say, they will transform what we do not understand into what at least we can see. Now, it doesn't mean that
Yeah.
we understand it, but at least they are presenting it in a way that, okay, that's in front of us. And
Yeah. Oh,
and
lovely.
yeah, and probably I'm thinking even artists themselves, when they are really engrossed and engaged into their whatever art they are embracing, they themselves are not fully understanding what's going on. You understand?
Oh, that's right.
They are dealing. You may tell me your testimony, but they are dealing with mystery. So they are contending with something they do not understand, basically. Because I will say, if that's not happening, they are not real artists.
Truly.
They may be
Yeah.
performers, basically, but
Preach.
not artists.
You're naming my experience for sure in the
Mm.
studio. Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, I think isn't the next thing you say that you read from, you go right into Hindu aesthetics. And
Sorry,
you
what?
say there, well, the passage you read from us on Radical Unknowing, right
Mm.
underneath it, you go right into Hindu aesthetics.
Mhm.
You say, in Hindu aesthetics, there is no possibility of the experience of rasa, the
Mm.
highest refinement of sacred
Mm.
emotion, without first having passed through the holy tunnel of chamatkara.
Chamatkar. Yeah.
Yeah, or holy bewilderment, which I had not heard that term. Of course, I know rasa and studied that
Yeah. Yeah. We have
in
a
my
very famous
studies.
one-liner in our tradition, which is Rasa Sar Chamatkar, which basically means the essence Sar of Rasa is Chamatkar.
Mm, yeah,
So
that's right.
astonishment, the essence of the experience of Rasa is astonishment. So that's so tied
Yeah.
to art, I will say, right?
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, I went on Monier Williams' Sanskrit dictionary and looked it up and had
Mm.
some fun with that. And
Mm.
of course, my dissertation work was on Sri Aurobindo, and he was a poet, and he describes his own creative process being so much about what you're saying. And I
Mm.
related to it as a sculptor. He was a poet, and he wrote a wonderful book called The Future Poetry, which I highly recommend as a way to sort of, I think he wrote 30, well, I think right now there are 36 to maybe 38 volumes of Sri Aurobindo's works now that are, published.
Mm.
And if you just enter one of them, you sort of enter all of them, but from a different angle.
Mm.
But this is through the angle of aesthetics and his creative process. And of course, his poem Savitri is epic, and I think has been an inspiration for me. It really sort of is a poem that is putting before us an incredible symbolic myth, that it really is the truth that is at the heart of all hearts and so forth. But it also is a record of his own yoga, of his own kind of, he said he wrote poetry to ascend the planes of consciousness. And so every time he sort of wrote the poem Savitri over his life, he began in 1916
Mm.
and he wrote it for the rest of his life, and he died in 1950. And he
Mhm.
was writing it up to almost the day he died, and he sort of didn't finish. But what we have is the best sort of version before he
Mhm.
passed, which is an amazing version. But he would start over every time he would sort of get to a point where the poem helped him achieve a certain level of mastery of knowledge. He would go through this sacred emotion and holy bewilderment, and then he would push through to another level of understanding and
Mm.
love and vision. And then he would realize, oh my gosh, the horizon was pushed further back, and he would have a
Mm.
whole other terrain to
Mm.
explore. And
Mm.
so, just like the nautilus shell, sort of pushing out to the next chamber. And so he'd write the poem again from that perspective.
Mm.
And then it was another expression of the poem Savitri. So he did that about 9 times throughout his life. I related so much to this because each
Mm.
sculpture in my own experience has been a self-expression, something to express myself. And then on the other side of that, when you finish, you've become a new person, and you aren't the same that you were before. And you've gained knowledge, you've gained understanding, but then you've stationed yourself at another place of ignorance, but it's another level above the previous one. But you're now at another level of ignorance, another level of lack of love, lack of you just can see ahead of you, like, oh my gosh, there's this other territory to master, to explore, to learn from. And so the next sculpture becomes another medium to do that
Mhm.
kind of thing. So for me, my whole life has been that way in terms of my art practice. And the most important piece, I guess, is on my website called The New Being, that I
Mhm.
did over a 10-year period. And that was so beyond me. Like, I did that in collaboration with my Sufi teacher. And because of her level of vision, I was able to accomplish much more than I would have done by myself. And so I feel like I didn't overpass myself in doing that. In a certain way, I still have more to explore in that sculpture. I have more to learn.
Yeah, I wonder how do you do, and because you, of course, you officially finish a particular work and then start another, but how much you feel it's finished in connection to what you were mentioning, no? Because there's the example of Aurobindo. He finished the poetry, and again, the finishing of the poetry took him to the awareness that there is a new layer to explore of that same poetry. So technically speaking, it's less finished than before.
Yes,
Every
yes.
time you think you're finishing, it's more and more unfinished. So yeah, I was just thinking about that, because at least personally, when I'm writing a book or something, it's just I have to force myself to, okay, this is finished, it's over, it has to be published. If not,
That's right.
it will be always changing, which in itself may be an interesting experiment, as you were mentioning the example of Aurobindo, never finishing
That's
any
right.
book and just.
That was his intention. That's right. He's like, I'm not going to make this a finished product. This is more about the process, really. But the product we have, of course, is a record of that process, and it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the point of not being so comfortable, because generally we are so comfortable with closure instead of disclosure. Like finishing the product. Okay, it's done, finished. And actual real art and real mystery is like a constant opening of potential and possibility, instead of this is it, finished, controlled, so on and so forth. And I really love what you mentioned, that the more you advance in your inner world by engaging in art, you realize like deeper levels of your ignorance, so to say. And I mentioned that, okay, progress means we are committing higher and higher mistakes every time.
Yes. Mistakes. That's so important. Failures, weakness. Oh my gosh. Crucial. I'm always sort of trying to tell my students that failure is the only way we learn. That's how else do we succeed except through failure?
Yeah.
And that's really what my studio practice has been about. Is it's a record of failure, and each sculpture is really an object of my failure to express myself, even though it might have been it's a record also of a partial success, and maybe that's a more positive spin. It's a partial success. Each one of these sculptures is that. And what a wonderful thing. And it can be a gift to the audience, the viewer, the reader of your book. And because they might be at a different place or find themselves needing exactly what you share through the artwork. And yet you are in another place or in a different place, and you just need other lessons that are next. But failure is so huge and so important.
Yeah. And I love what you mentioned, like acknowledging those mistakes, and whatever work you are presenting is a testimony to your failure, so to say. Actually, that's what brings success to the work as well. The awareness, the awareness of that dimension is warranting the actual success of the experience, so to say. Because generally we think the opposite. I will be successful the less mistaken I am, or the less I have to acknowledge that. And as I try to put in my book, so important not so much to traumatize failure, but to normalize failure as crucial for learning and progress, basically. And I think art is so much about that.
Yes, truly is. Gosh, I mean, I look forward to writing a book on the New Being sculpture, that 10-year project, and it will be a book about my failure that I experienced all through it. One thing that Murshida, our Sufi teacher, challenged me to do when she commissioned me to do that sculpture was to be not only the designer, the fabricator, the person to make it physically, but to be the project manager, which meant doing all that one does at the business end, creating a budget, hiring the subcontractors, and then firing if need be, helping people to work together, subcontractors to talk to one another. If there are fights or difficulties, conflicts that happen, to manage those. So it was incredible learning process. I failed miserably at all of those things. I'm an artist, by training. And so to do those sorts of business end
Mm,
or personnel kind of things, budget, the practical everyday, is a wonderful challenge that Murshida said. Basically, this is how your sadhana, your spiritual practice is going to be bringing down these wonderful, lovely, artistic, spiritual, mystical into, okay, how do we deal with a contract in which we agreed on this amount of money, but now you want more? And how do
mhm,
we, with love, with care, managing that with also, I'm responsible for this budget, responsible for the people who donated their savings, their life savings to this
mm,
project.
mm.
How do I manage that and be responsible for that? Boy, 10 years of pressure like that was created, matured me in a way I would have never, it would have taken 100 years, but this matured me in 10.
Well, thank you for sharing that bigger picture and context, because some of us, I already saw it, but some of the audience will look at your piece and they may not perceive. I mean, they may perceive if they have the eye, but they may not know all this particular
Yeah,
background that you are sharing, and that surely helps to increase the value of the work and to appreciate the actual work beyond the physicality of it. No, so.
yeah, that's right. So much goes in that's so practical and so,
Mhm.
yeah, so human.
Yeah, acknowledging the messiness and integrating it and
Oof.
making it a
Yes,
work of art.
it
Messiness
was.
as a work of art.
It
Yeah.
was nothing but a mess
Yeah,
that created that beauty.
I can feel the level of realization when saying those words coming from you. So,
Uh,
also, Patrick, relation to the idea of art as mystery before going to mystery as art. So to say, something that comes to my mind is this famous quote from Dostoevsky. He will say, like, beauty will save the world.
Oof, I
And
loved that. Yeah,
yeah,
love
I
that.
love it. Yeah, that's beautiful. And of course, art is generally connected to beauty, but as we mentioned, also art has to do with entering the
Uh-huh.
realm of mystery. So for me, it's important to connect all the things, no, like
Oof.
the
Yeah,
courage of the artist entering the unknown, extracting a new sense of purpose, so to say, to keep life meaningful
yeah,
for all of us. That's the dharma of the artist, so to say, the duty.
yes,
And by venturing himself, herself into that realm with such courage, bringing this new sense of purpose to the world, this new sense of beauty, wow, that will save the world. No, I like to flesh
Oof.
out this quote from Dostoevsky in terms
Oh
of
yeah,
and how, in that sense, all of us are in one way or another invited to be artists, in the sense of
yes,
invited to venture into the unknown with courage, extract some new sense of meaning and purpose, and offer that as a gift for the world's
correct.
survival, so to say, or salvation, basically.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, I think we've been talking about these very things so far.
Mm-hmm.
That beauty is what we've been talking about. I
Mm-hmm.
was obsessed with beauty since 1990 when I was studying in Rome as a sophomore in college. And at the time, I was at the University of Notre Dame. I was, um, I wanted to go to that school so bad because it was, as a Catholic growing up, and I was growing up in North Carolina, where it was a southern, the Bible Belt, as you know, you live there,
Yeah.
um, and I wanted to go to a Catholic place, and so I had the opportunity as a sophomore to go to Rome, and I knew I wanted to be an artist, and my imagination was just exploding when I
Mm-hmm.
got there because of the beauty of the churches, the sculptures, the paintings, the history, the Italian Renaissance, the Baroque, the Mannerist, all of that was just over the top. And I was taking a class with a professor on Italian literature, and she knew of my love of art and visual arts, and I was always, sketching while I was taking notes. And we were studying Petrarch and Boccaccio and Dante,
Mm-hmm.
and oh, fantastic, right? And she asked me a question that to this day I think about a lot. And she says, she asked me, Patrick, do you desire beauty? And I thought, I don't know why, it just struck me to the core of my being at the time as a little 19-year-old, 20-year-old. I think I turned 20 at that time. And so ever since I've been wondering, what is it? What is beauty and what do I desire? What is it that I desire that is beautiful? It became this obsession. And to this day, it's a question that's in front of me. Like, I feel like I have answered that question, but then again, there's a whole other horizon that's pushed back where I need to answer it. I need to ask it and answer it again. And, it was my dissertation topic. It's been my spiritual practice. But we've been talking about how I think the messiness of the creative process, both practically speaking, and then also forming sculptures or drawings or writings, that is the product at the end of the day, maybe. But that the process is really one of transforming chaos into order, one of ugliness into beauty, and one of death into life, so and so forth. It's really it's the union of opposites, the work of uniting opposites to achieve another level of knowledge and experience is a messy, difficult process. And the artistic creative process is that in spades. That's what comes to mind first.
Yeah, and I think that's why, I mean, if one really appreciates the journey of whomever is willing to enter into that space, as we mentioned, to extract something from that and convert it in art and present it as a gift for humanity, those who appreciate that will be willing to. And that's why works of art are the most expensive artifacts in the whole planet, basically.
Yeah.
I will say, because I mean, they are priceless in one sense, because they represent such a voyage, such a journey into a very unknown land that the real artist is willing to do, that you can never pay enough the beauty that comes from the unknown in such a way, basically. The epiphany that those real works will like represent for us, like portals, basically.
Yeah, that reminds me, that's pretty much what Sri Aurobindo said, if you don't mind me reading this. He said, if art's service is but to imitate nature, then burn all the picture galleries and let us have instead photographic studios. It is because art reveals what nature hides that a small picture is worth more than all the jewels of the millionaires and the treasures of the princes. That idea of because art reveals what nature hides, that's the true value. And for me, it's like, well, what is it revealing? What is it hiding? Becomes for me the obsession. And how can my work sort of pull back those veils? But at the same time, I think it's the author and the artist's role to maintain the hiddenness. To both, it's withdrawing, but it's coming forward at the same time. This truth, this beauty.
Yeah, that reminds me what Dietrich Bonhoeffer will say, like the duty of he won't say the artist in this case, he was speaking about theologian, but the duty of the theologian is to keep the mystery as mystery.
Yeah.
Well, and instead of trying to solve the mystery, because generally we are obsessed with closure, with solving, instead of keeping the mystery open, so to say. So I think our artists maybe be able to touch one point in that infinite line and extract it and share it with us to give purpose and meaning. But that doesn't mean that the artist will think or say, I have solved the mystery, that's it. But it's just like the epiphany that came to that person, and that person is extending that to the world somehow. But the mystery remains as mystery. That's my point.
Yes, it does. But I wonder, though, this is something we could talk about more, is that it remains mystery to a part of the being that is not capable, the mind, which is what I'm getting at. The mind is not capable of understanding the mystery. But there is a part of our being, I think, that becomes one with it, and then the mystery sort of possesses us. We don't possess it, or we don't sort of put it in a box, but it sort of then becomes enfolding us, and therefore we join it, and then it becomes knowable. It becomes revealed fully, but not to our mind. It really becomes fully revealed to our heart. This is something I'm still trying to work out language for,
Mm,
but I feel like there is this progress that's maybe asymptotic, that you never really get to the union. But
mm,
I want to say that there is a union,
mhm.
but that union is much more than we think it is, and the mind thinks it is. That it reveals the fullness, the total, the complete. But it's inapproachable with the mind, but it's approachable with these higher faculties within us.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah.
I totally agree that there is a way to, as you mentioned, to be embraced by the mystery. Actually, in our particular tradition, Krishna, God Himself, is
Yeah.
described in many sections of scripture as, interestingly, Krishna means the all attractive, going back for a
Yes.
minute to the notion of beauty, but at the same time, he's described as mystery personified. So
Mm.
again, the two notions of mystery and beauty are intertwined between the two, and of course,
Mm-hmm.
there is the possibility, the hope, the experience of entering in connection with that mystery fully, but also, as I think you may agree, that the nature of that mystery is eternally evolving and ever unfolding. So in that sense, we can never uh, say I got the mystery fully, and it's no longer mystery. I already know everything about it, but because it's in constant unfolding and
Unfolding.
evolution. So in that sense, I will say that keeps us humble, even while we are having that full display of the mysterious in our own hearts. So
Well, this is what I wonder. I wonder, if there's a humility, I guess, even in becoming knowledgeable about it all. That
mhm,
once one becomes one with God, it's not possible to be prideful, because
mhm,
there is no pride in God.
mhm,
There's a projection going on, I think, if we think, well, if I become God, and then I think I know it all, I'm going to
mhm,
become sort of not humble anymore.
mm,
I wonder, it's like, well, no, when you become God, you become God. And that means the most humble,
mm,
the most serving,
mm,
going underneath anyone. Oh, one
mm,
of my Murshids always used to say, understanding means to stand under people.
mhm,
And if you really understand, then you really do stand under them. You really do serve them. You really do bow to them,
yeah,
maybe in ways that are silent, they don't know.
yeah.
But to understand it all would be to stand under it all.
Yeah, one of
And I,
my teachers, Siddhartha Maharaj, will say, when you reach what he would call the spiritual world or the highest level of consciousness, he said, nobody is to serve you, but you are to serve everyone. Like
ah,
implying, like everyone will be serving you, but you won't be expecting that. You will be just standing under everything and everyone, and willing to
mm-hmm.
give yourself, no? Because everything will be made of such a substance that will be just worthy of your full
Yeah,
giving, and as you mentioned, there won't be a place for pride. At least in our tradition, we'll consider that the ultimate fruit of bhakti or devotion and love of God is just a gift. We may call it
yeah,
costless grace. So
yeah,
we can never be proud about a costless gift that has given to us unconditionally.
right,
No,
right, right.
doesn't compute. No?
Yeah,
So the very nature of unconditional love, like implies the fullest humility, basically,
haha,
if we really, and we were talking yesterday here, we had a lecture in France about, because someone may say, okay, God is already loving you unconditionally, so that may, someone say, well, that may take you to be lazy and relaxed and complacent. He's already loving me unconditionally. But not, if you really understand what does it mean, that will move you to such a place that you will give yourself in reciprocation in the most humble
hmm,
possible way, because there's so much coming, and it's not that even maybe we made something to deserve it, it's already there. So yeah, if we
yeah,
properly understand that the dynamics there's no place for actual pride. If there's proper understanding of how
yeah.
reality operates,
And
pride
there's no
evaporates.
evaporates, and you know what? Also, I think evaporates is humility. Any opposite, or any kind of experience of any of the opposites evaporates, and there is just this natural, spontaneous
Hmm.
service,
Hmm.
and devotion, and knowledge.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Patrick, regarding we talk a little bit on art as mystery. So regarding mystery as art, some different
Yeah.
perspective on the topic, and we already mentioned uh, some words about chamatkar and astonishment, but I'd like to invite you to also share some thoughts in connection. You already did, but a little bit more if
Yeah.
possible, which the idea of certitude, because the opposite of mystery somehow is certitude and certain type of sometimes addiction we may have to certitude. No,
Haha.
addiction to have to be certain of things, and you I think properly mentioned that's kind of the opposite of faith. Because
Yeah.
I remember Father Richard Rohr, he always says that, and I love it. He will ask his audience, so
Yeah.
what's the opposite of faith? And generally people may say
Yeah.
doubt or something, and he will say, no, the opposite of faith is certainty. No.
I
And
love that.
he throws them to a pit of uncertainty by saying that.
That's right. He does. He's so good. I'm so glad you're friends with him, and what a
Mm,
service he's giving to the world.
yeah.
Yeah.
So he
Yeah.
makes this point over and over again, now how faith actually has to do with doubt, proper doubt, healthy doubt that nourishes,
Yeah.
that keeps us open, mystery. And he will describe faith as being patient with mystery. No, like
That's right.
developing this like
Yeah.
patience and willingness to coexist with those things that are not fully certain yet, and
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
allow their unfolding in us. So I don't know what you can share to us about that in your own
Hmm.
experience.
I think you provide such wonderful advice for your listeners on this because at least the podcast I've seen, you've talked about this, and um, certainly I think we're in full agreement with this. I guess I'm talking about this with my students a lot, that they're in a place of uncertainty in their lives, being freshmen or sophomores or whatever, or they're seniors going off to get a job or go forward. That
Mm.
trying to encourage them to be comfortable in that discomfort,
Mhm, mhm,
to make friends with it, and surrender, because that's really where we have to be able to surrender.
mhm.
That's the keynote, I think, of this process, surrender. And it's the keynote of the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. It's the keynote of Mira Baba's um, teaching. And of course, I think what teaching doesn't have it?
Yeah, I'm
So,
just thinking about my own tradition
your
and
own
how
tradition, yeah,
crucial
Gaudiya.
surrender is. Yeah,
Of
yeah,
course, in bhakti, I mean, goodness,
yeah.
that's what it is. I think what I mean, and that's the process of surrender when the ego wants to assert itself in the creative process as an artist, and you're sort of facing this mystery, you're facing this unknown,
Mm,
and it could be maybe you're at the beginning of the process and you don't know what it is you want to make, and you have this blank canvas or empty studio, or you're in the middle and you sort of are stuck, or you're at the end and you feel like, I'm not sure when to finish this.
mm,
There is a surrender that has to happen every step of the way,
mm,
to bring it to this conclusion, whatever that conclusion might be.
mm, mm,
Um, and so I think there has to be a surrender just every single moment. And so it's a constant letting go, a constant letting go.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I,
because then all of a sudden this rush of feeling can come in, or rush of thoughts, or a dream might happen. I've been especially gifted with dreams in my sadhana over time. For some reason, it's been the way that God's communicated to me, and where I've gotten to an impasse in my life and I've had to surrender, or I've gotten really frustrated with a certain level of uncertainty. And I just said, okay, God, I'm going to surrender here. I'm going to just let it go. I'm going to stop chasing this. And then all of a sudden I feel something chasing me, but then I've got to be open. Most recently, I suppose, the most recent example of this, if this is helpful to listeners, is that my father passed away in 2019, and
mm,
I was not especially close to him, but we had a very fraught relationship, and so I had to go through a lot of counseling and coming to terms with some pain and stuff like that, growing up with him. But when he did pass, we said goodbye, and I could say with full throated thankfulness how thankful I was to him, and say that to him.
mm,
Um, and then when he passed, I was incredibly hit with grief. I thought, maybe it wouldn't be so difficult, but it was super difficult. And then course, this was 2019. COVID hits a few months later,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt myself. And also, this was a few years after I finished the New Being sculpture, and that sculpture project really finished me. I was in a void. I was in a dark spot of just not knowing what to do next, not knowing who to be next. I was in the darkness. I was in a cave, and I wanted to get out of that cave so bad. And then my father passed, and it made the cave more in my face. Like I could not deny this anymore. The Divine Mother was saying to me, I have you in a cave and I don't want you to leave it, is what I felt. Well, I had a good counselor tell me this. He says, I can feel that you're in a cave, and the mother is keeping you, and she wants to keep you there. And so I decided, as a way to process this grief and this void that I felt in art, was to go and do the spiritual exercises of Saint Ignatius of Loyola. I had started them years ago, and I felt like I wanted to finish them, and it was just the thing. I started it in 2020, and I finished a year later. So I did like the full on, meeting with a spiritual director, and I asked my Murshida about it at the time. I was like, "Do you mind what do you think about me doing this for my own personal sadhana?" She said, "That sounds like a good idea." So I was able to bring my Catholic upbringing, my Sufi training, my Sufi experience, and the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. I was it was definitely focused on the Bible, reading the scriptures. But you there are 4 stages, and at the last stage, you're sort of meditating on the crucifixion and then the resurrection. And you're meant to imagine yourself on the cross. You're meant to imagine yourself with him, and you're meant to imagine yourself being buried with him in the tomb, and then meditating on all of that, and then meditating about exiting the tomb. And I was clear. I was not ready to exit. In my own meditation, it was so strong that I felt the resurrection. I felt, I could meditate on that and feel it within myself, but I couldn't feel that I was ready to leave that tomb with him, with Jesus. I was ready. I needed to stay in that cave with him, or with the Divine Mother, with the earth. And because I was fighting it. And now I was like, I made friends with the darkness. I made friends with that cave. And man, it felt good. It felt healing. And I feel only now I'm sort of ready to kind of come out of the cave, but it's little by little. I'm sort of peeking around the corners. But I feel so grateful to that period, all of it, for sort of baking me, in this oven or in this cave.
Wow.
I don't know if that gets to your question, but that's what comes to mind.
No, that's beautiful. And to begin with, I deeply appreciate your vulnerability to open and share your own inner journey and experience with your father, and with all that you went through, and the void you were after finishing your work. I can really empathize in so many ways in my own journey with things you've shared, even with the day that my own father passed away, similar to yours. And similarly, to find myself a certain inner void after concluding some particular project. Yes, so important and important. Yeah, I totally resonate with everything you mentioned, especially the idea of surrender as so crucial as entering the cave and staying there and allowing the cave to, as you mentioned, to bake you and making friends with darkness. In our particular tradition, surrender is basically the foundation. Surrender is another way of speaking about what we are talking about today, and it's basically the underlying, the stage on which we will perform, so to say, or sometimes we use the word lila to refer to the eternal drama, loving drama between love and the soul, the relationship that sometimes is called lila. So the stage on which that lila will be performed, it's made of surrender. Sometimes we will say that poetically, because the lila needs a very powerful foundation and stage, because it's a very powerful thing that is going on there. So the stage, the soil has to be made of surrender. And surrender, I really love your point of surrender being a corresponding form of surrender for every particular moment, and it's not so much like one act performance.
No,
Because
no.
sometimes
Yeah.
I've heard this idea, okay, you surrender and that's it. Like if you do it once and there's no need for further surrender, and actually every single situation and challenge and chapter of my life is inviting me for a very unique expression of surrender without end. uh,
Yeah.
and the surrender may take, or the shelter that we are seeking, because sometimes we were talking yesterday in our lecture, sometimes we try to surrender to the divine and we pray for, let's say, shelter. And but sometimes we also may have a very idealized idea of how the shelter should look like, or even how the cave should look like, no? And we were narrating one famous lila in our tradition, which is the Govardhan lila, where Krishna is like lifting a whole hill, very big hill that is now in Vrindavan in India, with his little finger for a week. But the
Right.
point is that the inhabitants of Vrindavan, of this sacred land, go to Krishna begging for shelter, but they are open that the shelter may look as Krishna likes to. It's not that, okay, give me shelter in this way, in this moment. And sometimes
Yes.
we may have this conditioned idea, which is, again, is some subtle form of addiction to certainty and control. Like, God, give me your mercy, but that's how your mercy should look like, no? And He will give real mercy, which is not how it should look like according to our criterion. But sometimes
Yes.
He shows mercy, and we immediately pray to Him again, please give me mercy to protect me from this. And He will say, that was my mercy from your previous prayer.
That's right.
So you are
Yeah.
begging me protection from my own mercy that I'm sharing to you.
Beautiful. That's right.
So it's embarrassing, it's messy, but that's where we are.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
This is you want me to undo what I have wished, what I have willed for you.
Mm,
You want me
mm.
to undo that? No.
Yeah, yeah, and
No,
that's surrender. Again, surrender can take
yeah.
so many forms, so many shapes. And as you mentioned, the cave and the darkness, there's no only one shade of darkness or one type of cave.
Oof.
There are unending ones. So yeah.
That's right. That's
Mm,
right.
mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate the symbol of the cave. We sometimes use the same
Yes.
expression in our tradition, like prayers to Krishna in his different forms. And there's a famous prayer that he's described as a lion, and it's like, "May you roar in the cave of my heart."
Oof.
But the point is, for that to happen, first we have to be willing to enter the cave in itself,
That's
because
right.
he may be roaring in the cave of your heart, but if we are not willing to access the cave, we may not be hearing
Mm.
the roaring, basically.
Well,
So
and where was he born, right?
mm-hmm,
Where was our beloved Krishna born? But
mm-hmm,
in a jail cell, right?
mm-hmm,
I feel like there's also this, that's a wonderful image,
mm,
powerful image
mm-hmm.
of opposition that that the Lord of the universe would incarnate, and where would he go? He would go into a jail cell. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like, there's this wonderful pattern we're meant to follow.
Mm-hmm.
Enter the cave, enter the jail cell, find the into surrender, and then find freedom, then find resurrection, then find whatever symbol you want. But
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. And
yeah,
I find that those patterns are very present in a very cohesive way throughout cross traditional, not only in our
yeah,
particular
yeah.
tradition. The very birth of Jesus is in a very
Hmm.
humble place, no, not in any fancy, like a
Yeah,
here he comes or whatever.
but threatened by Herod, just the same way Kamsa is threatening Krishna.
Hmm. Hmm.
There's this incredible pattern of something new is being born on the earth, and something old doesn't want that to happen. There's
Hmm.
something old in me that doesn't want the new thing to grow,
Hmm.
and that battle between the old and the new uh, is got to be worked out, and that's where I think that's the messiness. That's where beauty is born from that battle.
Hmm.
That's the Krishna is born from that. The beautiful one
Hmm.
is born from that battle.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It always reminds me of Thomas Merton saying, and I may have repeated this quote like 3,000 times already, but it shows so many meanings in so many contexts. He will say, our salvation begins in the most ordinary moments of our daily life. Uh,
Yep,
in
that's
connection to
right.
what you just mentioned, no, like the battle, not battling, but the dealing with messiness and proper entering into that messy, ordinary space, and you can come reborn, death reborn, and with a new gift
Uh-huh.
to offer to the world and in your own heart. But yeah, there is no way but to go through the messiness, which many times, as we already mentioned, is to. I always also remind Father Richard saying we generally advance more by doing it wrong than by doing it right. Mhm.
That's right. Yeah, he says that beautifully.
So,
Yeah,
mm,
yeah,
mm. Patrick, there is one comment here that was sent by a friend of mine, Bhaktirasa. Let's see, she's inviting us to. She says,
yeah.
can you please speak to surrender as being an opening in love compared to a sense of wrestling, an external force to do something I don't want to do? Kind of. I think
Hmm.
there are a few words that I think need correction, but generally she's inviting us to talk more of surrender as an opening in love, in contrast with sometimes the idea of surrender like I'm wrestling with something, or like I have to do something I don't want to do, but I have to surrender. I don't have other option, instead of a more voluntary opening
Ah, I see. Yeah, there's
to
a
love.
kind of yeah, there's a contrast between those two approaches
Uh-huh.
of
Mhm.
yeah, I because I guess in my own story, I guess I'm giving you both that I was wrestling. I was revolting against what God was willing for me,
Mm,
which was to stay in a cave,
mm,
to remain in a cave, and let myself not advance out into the world yet, um, versus the surrender that I was meant to do. I
mhm,
think it's because it's a messy process, it's gonna look like both things, it's gonna be looking like a revolt and a wrestling and then a surrender, but then like, "Oh, no," your ego asserts itself again.
mhm,
There's a kind of a backing and forthing between a voluntary surrender versus a revolt until
mm,
finally the part of our being that wants to grow, um, wins, and the part of our being that doesn't want to grow, surrenders and loses. And it has to lose. I think in Sufi poetry, you read a lot of this about the beloved winning
mm,
and the devotee losing. I mean, what
mhm,
a wonderful story of this is Rumi. I don't know if folks know this, but he was an incredibly successful theologian in his context, and his master Shams of Tabriz was a God realized master, I guess, and they were spending a lot of time together,
mm,
and they used to play chess, and Rumi always lost. He always lost. Shams of Tabriz was always, and they were both. I mean, Rumi was like, I guess, a really intelligent man, and would be somebody you would think would be able to win a chess game, but he
mm,
always lost to Shams of Tabriz. And finally, one day, Shams says, "Checkmate." And I think I might get the story wrong, but Rumi puts the playing the little piece down and says, "Well, you won." And at that point is when I guess in the symbol of putting that piece down, it was like a symbol of surrender. It was like,
mm,
okay, I lost. And at that point, Shams saw an opening and he touched his forehead or he kissed his forehead. Something happened. He gave him a touch
mhm,
and he said, "No, you won."
mm,
And he gave him God realization
mm,
at that point through this touch. But it was the culmination of these incredible years of losing.
mm,
And kind of a backing and forth. And I guess when I read these incredible teachers and spiritual figures about how they gained their illumination or their God realization or however people call it, um, it was a wrestling that
mm,
led to a surrender, a voluntary surrender that led to a gift, a grace that was unbidden, that no one earned, but that there was a process that got to that point. I think of Jacob and God wrestling in the Bible. We're reading that with my students now.
mm,
It's really, and he gets wounded. Like there's you wrestle with God and you're gonna God wants to wrestle. I guess that's sort of part of the possible. But then you get to a point where you're marked with this wound, and you take that forward. I think that's a mystery. I think that's interesting to talk about. But I don't know. I think her question's so beautiful. I just think both aspects of the wrestling and the voluntary surrender in love
Mhm.
are two sides of the same coin, and there's no getting around those two sides.
Mhm.
I think. I don't know. What do you think? What other
Yeah,
thoughts
I
have
was
come up?
reflecting on that, and I will agree with you. I was reflecting about different, as you mentioned, there are different forms of surrender to every part of the journey. So each one of those forms of surrender, at least during certain stages, will also include their corresponding form of wrestling and voluntary acceptance. On some level, then you accept, then you wrestle a little bit, but still accepting, still wrestling, and so on and so forth. It reminds me of the Bhagavad Gita also in the very beginning
Oh,
when
yeah.
Krishna is telling Arjuna to battle. Uh, he starts to
Yeah.
Arjuna starts to battle, but with Krishna basically.
That's right. That's right. The yoga
Starts
of despair leads to the
Yeah,
yoga with.
yeah, yeah. Vishada yoga. So he starts to
Uh-huh.
argue and present arguments not to surrender, basically,
That's
till
right.
it comes this famous verse, but he says, "Sisyastiham prapanam sadhunam, sisyastiham sadhunam prapan." I
Yeah.
surrender to you. I'm your student. So there is a
Such a
point,
perfect story. Yeah. For
and
that.
that's the beginning of the Gita so forth. So the Gita very clearly depicts how the very initial chapters of our surrender process will be some little wrestling, and Krishna is generous. God is generous enough as to taste taste some rasa in the wrestling. It's okay. No,
It's right. It's a
will
yoga of despair. It's like there's a process to this. There's a
Mhm.
real
Yeah,
process and a real sacred quality to wrestling,
yeah,
as
and
there
still, as you
is.
mentioned, it's still the word yoga is there in the chapter. No, it's not that it's only
Yeah,
called Vishada or despair. It's
that's
Vishada
right.
yoga.
Yoga.
No?
Yeah,
So there is a way to link and to bond and to connect, and that means there is some reciprocity in that wrestling stage. So I think it's healthy for practitioners to see it like that, so they don't feel that their wrestling is just you are rebellious and you are not wanting to surrender, and this is you're against God. No, sometimes
that's
they
right.
want self. You can self whip yourself, so to say, self-loading, and to
That's right.
learn to accept and understand, okay, this is part of the surrender process. It's not just I give myself fully. No, that's also a part, but also to reach that point in a substantial way, there may be some necessary wrestling, as you pointed to, and
That's
again,
right.
Krishna is putting that into the equation of
That's
that
right.
type of yoga, so to say. No.
That's right. It's like, who's stimulating this despair? It's Krishna himself. I think,
Mm,
it's
mhm,
like, God doesn't want us to reach. He doesn't want automatons. He wants us to surrender with full-throated cheerfulness,
yeah.
full-hearted cheerfulness. And you don't get that without facing the shadow within your heart,
Mhm,
and
mhm,
surrender, and giving that honestly to Krishna, and saying to him, I really don't want to do this. I'm not going to. And
yeah.
then when you voice that, you admit it there, but behind it is this, I think, commitment to transform it, and to commitment to be it being transformed. You're sort of laying it at the feet of Krishna in order for it to be transformed. So I
Hmm.
think he wants that honesty. He wants that. Doesn't want us to sort of pull any punches, because he's not pulling any punches. He's punching us pretty hard, I think, in life,
Mm,
and so we don't need to pull any either.
mm,
Um, and I don't think those punches are that he's giving us are anything but love. And in Sufism, we
mhm,
kind of talk about the master gives us the kiss or the slap, and both are
mhm.
blessings.
We will say the exact same thing.
Yeah,
Sometimes we will say the slap is a special mercy, so to say,
it's even better, right?
because
Because it can really advance you.
yeah, and also because that's a symptom of that there is some intimacy and confidence, because you won't slap anyone and everyone, so to say. Sometimes the example,
No,
I
that's a
slap you,
compliment.
I'm demonstrating we are close enough for me to slap you, so to say.
That's right. That's right. That's a huge compliment.
Yeah,
One
yeah.
of Meher Baba's, he had many disciples on both hemispheres. Indian disciples, but also European ones. And he brought a person from England to live with him. His name was William Donkin, and he was a doctor, a medical doctor. And he was sort of a newbie for a little while there. And he was observing how Meher Baba treated his Indian disciples, and he was hard on them. He was really brutal, scolding them, slapping them even. He was brutal. And Meher Baba treated him, this European person, with sweetness, kindness, love. And Bill Donkin, he was just like, got a little annoyed, which kind of, it just, expresses his own maturity, because he's like, wait a minute, he's never hard with me. He's always kind with me. Does he not love me? He got to that point. And in his journals where he's talking about that, and he finally got scolded one day by Meher Baba, and he was so happy. He was just like, so our teachers, our murshids, wanted us to read his diaries because of his maturity. I think because he understood the intimacy of the master with the student leads to these kinds of interactions that can lead to real, even more incredible growth. Timed and personal, but
yeah, which of course, I just a clarification for some of the audience. With this, we are not promoting any form of masochism. Like, I want to be
not at
chastised.
all, not at all.
Because sometimes in between there may be, unfortunately, in some dynamics between guru and disciple, situations of actual abuse or mistreatment.
Correct.
And that's not, externally may look similar, but internally it's not the same. In some cases, it may be.
Thank you for saying that.
No,
That's
it's
right.
yeah. I assume everyone will get it, but just in case, brief clarification.
That's right.
Because it can be tricky, because externally may look exactly the same, and if you have gone through some sequence of abuse or whatever, when you see a genuine form of that due to your own trauma, so to say, or layers, you may project that and think, oh, again, here's something like that, and maybe it's not that at all. But
that's right. And I think we, in the West too, I think we're just learning what is a guru. How does a guru-student relationship, what does that look like? And we're still grappling with that. I think it's new to us. So I'm so appreciative of you mentioning that.
Thank you so much for mentioning that, because again, in our tradition, that's part of it. The slapping is there, whether from the guru, from God himself, as we mentioned, but providing that the student is in a position that he can also understand the slapping as mercy and
that's right. And as an act of love, really, where and also I've noticed too that the kiss can feel like a slap. The kiss itself, if it's a beautiful sort of gesture of love, where you feel completely embraced and accepted, understood from the bottom up, that can be really disorienting and feel like, I don't want that because no one's given me that before, and that's traumatizing. And I think I've had that, where the Murshid gives such love and acceptance and understanding, and you're just like, I don't know where to place this. I don't know how to hold this. It's too much.
It's too much. Yeah. Too disconcerting. Yeah. Because unconditional love is always too much by definition. So the point is how we find ourselves in a place that, despite it's too much, we can deal with that without running away from that, because it demands from us total nakedness, basically. It naked
vulnerability.
It puts us in that particular situation. Recently we were in some retreat with a few friends, and one of them expressed such a deep vulnerability that for the rest of us there was no option but to enter into that same space, because vulnerability brings forth vulnerability. There was no place to, okay, she's vulnerable, but we can remain non-vulnerable here. There was no, it was, or we become vulnerable, or we jump out of the window or something like that.
That's right.
Fortunately, nobody jumped out of the window, but as we talked, a few months in, I think our first podcast in this series, and we were talking about sexuality and how many times people is terrified about actual sexuality, because that demands real vulnerability and real nakedness on every level.
That's right.
Of the sense. So it's not something so simple and so easy, and that's why people turn to sexuality in a more exploitative and superficial way without really
Going deep.
culturing emotional intimacy and all that it actually entails. So,
Yes.
and somehow that has to do with today's topic, which is again dealing with mystery and
Yeah, I was just thinking, yeah.
and remaining naked in front of that and willing in front of that, and understanding that, as we say in our tradition, Hari Bhagati Premnasra Bhava Kutilava, but love moves in a crooked way like a snake. So it's unpredictable. We cannot never know what will happen next. So we remain naked in front of an unpredictable mystery. So that requires some courage, to say the least.
That's, oh gosh, yeah. Yeah, I don't know, I don't have the quote in front of me, but Meher Baba sort of taught his disciples that marriage could be, or the intimacy of marriage can be just another path to God realization, and that because of the incredible opportunities for different levels of love that you can explore with your partner, and the mysteries of those levels are there. That, you know, with one touch of the master, you could get God realization because of that marriage crucible, you could say.
Yeah,
that's been my experience too.
Yeah, I appreciated that you mentioned before we went live, you were speaking about how your marriage is part of your sadhana, basically. So I really appreciated that integration and putting everything inside it. I mean, potentially everything can be an aspect of your sadhana.
That's right. Yeah, Aurobindo said all life is yoga, and I think, yeah, that's right. I mean, so all the things we've been talking about, I should be mentioning Audrey, because my wife Audrey was my partner in every one of these things, every part of these, the sculpture project, my void afterwards, my desire to be, to follow the wish of my Murshids to be a tenured professor, which is what I'm doing now in theology and religious studies. She's been my partner, you know, every step of the way, and it's been difficult because we have different ideas about how these things should happen, and you know, we have got to talk about finances. We've got to talk about, you know, whether or not we have children, which we decided not to, you know, early on, for instance. You know, how do we negotiate living apart right now? We're living apart for a year, and we've done that before, and there's a mystery to that, my goodness. And the mystery, and I spent 4 years apart from her doing the sculpture project. The last 4 years we were apart. And I don't know, it's just, again, the idea, the growth that happens through that opposition has been so profound and fast. You know, I think the growth it would have taken hundreds of years, but you know, with these oppositions that we've encountered individually and together, it's pushed us forward in lovely ways together.
Yeah. I was thinking about what you mentioned about how your wife also accompanied you through your different cave chapters, so to say, and so on. And
Sure.
I was thinking about how when we are in these deep dark places, so to say, not as something negative, but just deep dark places, in one sense, it's so much about how we deal with that individually, but also how important it is to have life partners and companions that somehow or other can empathize with what we are going through, no? Because you are alone, you are by yourself in the cave, but in another sense, you need others to accompany in the cave somehow, to shed some light. So
that witness,
because we doesn't take away our own responsibility in the cave, but sheds light somehow on our duty in the cave, sends us back to the cave to do our our dharma there. But I was just thinking about that in my own personal experience, and all the times that I've been in the cave, of course, it's very clear I need to enter this cave by myself. I cannot just try to bring the whole world with me, because if everything that is outside the cave is brought inside the cave, it's not the cave. No. I'm still in the same place, so to say, no, because sometimes that may happen. Okay, I noticed that I'm being invited to the cave, so let me bring this and this and this person and this thing. So everything inside the cave looks exactly like what's outside the cave. So You have
Ah,
never
yeah.
entered the cave, so I really feel when the call for the cave is there. Okay, the least thing I can take with me, I will have to go as naked as I can, but
Yeah.
nonetheless, it's good to have those well-wishing voices sounding. Even
Yeah.
when we are inside the cave, some voices coming from outside the cave reminding us,
That's
remain in
right.
the cave, it's okay. I'm outside the cave doing my thing. I'm okay here. You remain in the cave. Yes.
That's right. That's it.
Hmm.
We need those voices.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Patrick, one idea I was thinking, what will you say, especially from your own experience, probably maybe in connection to the Sufi tradition? We are speaking about mystery as an art, as a living art, in connection to God Himself, God as a mystery. I don't know if there is any thoughts you have in connection to how Sufism approaches the notion of the divine as
Hmm.
mystery, one's relationship with the divine, the role of mystery in it,
I
or
don't know if there's,
we
yeah.
ourselves as mystery, even on some
Yeah.
level, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we've been talking about the Sufi perspective so fully, but I wonder if, yeah, if there's a way to hone in on it more. Because I think the Sufi understanding, at least, I should probably say to our listeners, Sufism, to most people's imagination, it is the mystical tradition of Islam.
Mm-hmm.
And Meher Baba teaches that actually it's wider than that, that Sufis have been around since the dawn of time, that they have been connected to a world teacher and are meant to take that teacher's message and their teaching sort of to try to live it in
Mm-hmm.
the world as a vanguard or, you know, as a help to creation. And so there were Sufis for Zoroaster, there were Sufis for Krishna and Rama, for
Mm-hmm.
Jesus, for Muhammad. And so, and for Meher Baba, we think of him that way and celebrate him that way. And so um, the teaching is always the same, but there's, I guess you could say, Meher Baba says that the teaching also changes for the times. So I think this is in Hinduism too, where you see, different yugas need different teachings.
Mm-hmm.
So bhakti becomes, much more important, for instance, in the Kali Yuga,
Mm-hmm.
and more stripped down. Just it's so difficult this time. We need just kind of God's name,
Mm-hmm.
just preaching God's name, and that's something that Meher Baba was very clear about. Just pick a name of God and chant that 30 minutes a day, and we are meant to also look for 15 minutes a day on top of that, a picture of any guru we want. That could be our own gurus or others, and so every day we do that to enter that mystery. That's the only rituals he gave us. He's like, I don't want any more rituals. I don't want these Sufi rituals of the past. I'm getting rid of those.
Mm-hmm.
Now it is only this name of God, and to live it. He's like, and so I don't know if people might not know, Meher Baba was silent for 44 years. He began in 1925 being silent. And he said it wasn't for his own sadhana. He's like, this is for the earth. This is for the cosmos. I'm going to be silent. You've been given all the teachings you need. It's time now to live them. So I've come to awaken, not to teach, is what he said. So he remained silent from 25 to his death in 1969. And so I think our Sufi community really links mystery to silence and his silence and what he meant by silence. And so I think it's going to be the accomplishment of, or the agenda of my scholarship really would be to write about this silence and to continue making sculptures about it, because I think my sculptures are about it too. I make these empty forms. They're hollowed out and empty.
Yeah, I saw
And
it.
for me, that is really it's sort of sculpting mystery. It's sculpting that silence that's at the heart of all creatures. But he said he would break his silence too. That was also something, a part of his message. And Baba lovers, people who are followers of Meher Baba, ask, what does that mean? And I think there's not agreement about that, but our our Sufi murshids have been very clear that that breaking has to do with the actual dissolution of the boundary that separates the gross planes, our gross plane that we see with our senses, and breaking that boundary and the boundary and between this world and the spiritual planes, the subtle planes and the mental planes, and letting that spiritual energy rain down onto the earth because of the breaking. And so the mystery of those spiritual planes is now raining down on earth in a way that it's an opportunity for growth of all creatures and people. And so I think we celebrate that in our Sufi programs, our music, our celebrations we have through, and that's something you can go to our website to see, some of our music and drama performances and stuff like that. So I think the arts are so important, actually, not just to me personally, but to our order, to celebrate the mystery of his silence and the breaking of his silence and what that means. So, yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you invoke the notion of silence, because it's so tied to the idea of mystery. Today I was talking with a friend of mine, a fellow practitioner who has an ashram. I'll be visiting his ashram in a few days in the Alps here in Switzerland.
Ah, wonderful.
And they always do silence retreats many times a year. And he just ended one a few days ago, and he was expressing to me how important he finds these periods and these experiences, and how much in our particular community does not sometimes emphasize enough. Although interestingly, Krishna himself in the Bhagavad Gita, for example, and I quote that in my book, he will say, among all secret things, I'm silence.
I know. I love that. I remember that quote beautifully. Yeah.
I think chapter 10, he said, among all secret things, I'm silence.
Yes.
So I try to make that point in the book, that silence doesn't mean not only silence. It's not so much about not speaking, but also about hearing. Actually, stop speaking so we can be more present and aware, and learn to listen, and how God speaks through silence as well. Not necessarily like he speaks in silence, but he speaks through silence.
That's right.
And I really feel really, at least on some level, more and more comfortable with this situation of being in silence and not needing to say too much, because we have so many things to say. In particular, in our tradition, there's so much information, so much theological detail. So we could be talking and talking and talking, and there you can never say enough. But also there is a point where we have to let silence speak for itself, which is again non-different from Krishna in our tradition. Silence for us will mean Krishna. He's speaking now. Let's hear. So, and again, sometimes we are not comfortable with silence. Sometimes in conversation in our daily life, if there is some silence, we have to fill the gap quickly.
Yes,
because
I've been playing with this with my students at the beginning. I have them put their phones away, their earbuds, their computers have to go away. We have to just be silent for just 2 minutes. I have a 50-minute class, so it's a very short class. So 2 minutes is, but I'm finding it. I've wanted to do it, and now I'm finally doing it with them, and it really helps me to then, when I do speak, I feel like it's coming from a different place than if we hadn't together gathered our presence and been silent together for a couple minutes. So
we part in our tradition many times, at least one of the moments where we are silent in some cases when we are eating, for example, having lunch or something. Not always, in some places. So it's a very important moment to, again, so many things are happening. Sometimes we may think silence, nothing will be happening, it's so boring.
Oh no,
nothing to do, but actually you start to
filled.
You start to measure the level of, as you mentioned, of content that is present in the whole of reality.
Yeah, indeed.
One thing more that comes to mind, I think we are already reaching the close of our conversation, Patrick, but I remember the other day when we were organizing for this particular episode, we were talking We already touched upon that in the beginning, but I would like to invite you to share a few more thoughts, especially from the traditions you are familiar with, regarding how I think you use this expression of opposition as fuel for progress, basically.
Yes.
Which again has to do
Oh,
with
yeah.
the idea of mystery, because opposition is what's opposition, basically. Probably something that we see as opposition because it still remains a mystery, or we don't know what actually is, and so on and so forth. So
Oh,
I don't know.
goodness. Yeah.
I'm thinking that it's so important uh,
Yes.
to learn to decrypt this particular
Yes.
instances. So any
Oh,
thoughts in that
yeah.
connection? Opposition as
This
fuel
is,
for progress.
yeah. Opposition fuels growth is a central teaching in our Sufi tradition. Our Murshids constantly remind us about this. Meher
Mm,
Baba constantly did. And the mother of the Sri Aurobindo ashram. Um, and I'm teaching the Bible now to my
mm,
students, and I've made the opposition fueling growth principle the principle I want them to notice as a part of every biblical story we've been reading, because you can see
mm.
it there. It's
All
amazing.
like all
And
pervading theme
all
throughout the whole
pervading. Oh my
narrative.
gosh, I think,
Mhm. Yeah.
I think it's a new way to read the Old Testament and the
Mm,
New Testament. Because I was teaching the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata and the Ramayana in a Hindu course I was teaching last year. And I used that principle there too. I said, you're going to find this principle filled throughout
mhm,
these two texts and these epics, right? I and my students got it, but
mm,
I think it really, whenever I bring it up and I try to explain it without art, it leads to opposition. People are opposed to the principle of opposition fueling growth. I mean, whether it's Hindus, whether it's Christians, whether it's people who aren't practicing, I think we know it's true. We know that we
mm,
grow through opposition,
mm,
but we also don't like it. It's a crude means that God is using to
mm,
manifest his perfection. It's an imperfect means to manifest perfection, I
mm,
guess,
mm,
that it's through ugliness, it's through that we get beauty, it's through violence that we get to nonviolence, it's
mm,
through hatred and suffering we get to love, it's through death that we get to life. But that, gosh, when you read any master, whether it's Ramakrishna, Ramana Maharshi, I'm sure Gaudiya tradition masters, you're going to see this as so important.
mhm,
Even yeah. So what is it? I mean, I guess it's just like I tell my students, you see it at the level of weight training where you're trying to strengthen your muscles. You're lifting weights that are too strong for your muscles, and you rip the tissue in your muscles.
mhm,
That's on purpose, to rip those tissues, and then you rest them, and then those tissues grow back stronger.
mm,
I think God's doing that with the cosmos, with COVID, with the social unrest, with the war in Ukraine, with climate change. I mean, all of these things are so difficult to manage. I think these are difficult processes of opposition that we need to be more conscious, more and living out the principles of our traditions with more love, more cheerfulness, more surrender,
mhm,
to be able to allow those tissues to grow back, because the violence is so extreme, the divisions are so hard, the everything is so extreme right now,
mm,
intense. So our practices have to be equal to the task. They have to be more intense. But that's going to strengthen our patience and strengthen our generosity, strengthen our goodness, strengthen our
mm,
love,
mm,
because the opposites are so forcefully in our face. We've got
mm,
to meet them. We've got to meet them with incredible love, incredible integral love, integral beauty, integral
mm,
everything.
mm.
So
Yeah,
yeah, those
yeah,
are initial thoughts.
yeah. Thank you. That reminds me. One of my teachers, he will say that opposition increases harmony.
Yeah.
Basically, I mean
Mm-hmm,
that's
mm-hmm.
the ultimate purpose of opposition is to take us to a place where a greater degree of harmony has to be invoked, so opposition stops being opposition, basically, so
Yeah.
we can integrate
Transformation.
and heal. Like Bhaktiras is quoting here, that is something that I also share in my book. Like, it is through our wounds that we are healed.
That's
uh,
right.
So the importance of embracing that open wound, so to say, as the doorway to redemption, basically,
Yeah, which is
instead of.
who gave
Mhm,
us that wound, and I think it's God. And
mm,
and Jacob wrestling God, he gives it, he wounds him,
mhm,
and he limps away. Jacob does, and
mm,
that wound becomes the very doorway to his advancement and his growth.
mhm,
And of course, you're in France there, and what does blessé mean? It's a
mhm,
blessing, but blessé means to wound in
mhm,
French.
hmm,
I tell my students that, and my teacher Mershida Connor, when she was alive, she was talking about this very principle of opposition fueling growth with us in a small company of people, and she looked at me and she says, what does blessé mean in French? And I had been studying French because of the mother of the Sri Aurobindo ashram, and I said, well, it means to injure, to wound.
mm,
And I thought, oh, that's so interesting. How cool, what a cool principle. But then she gave me a scolding right after that about some
mm,
other topic. And again, we're going back to like, I had the intimacy. I had the very many years of being her student that she could be this, she could give me the slap.
mm,
But it was like she was teaching me about blessing, and she was teaching me about blessé, to wound,
mm.
at this, not just through words, but through actually her scolding. So I walked away from that meeting like, whoa, I really got a lesson on that. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, I really love your combination between. I didn't know to begin with. I'm in France, but that doesn't mean I'm already familiar with the local language. So I appreciate your introduction to to that unique word. If I can only learn that particular word you have mentioned, that will be enough for French
Oh.
in this lifetime. No, the injury and the blessing at the same time, mercy, aggressive mercy, so to say.
Very
And
forceful. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But again, reading behind that, the how to say, the urgency in which God's love wants to be conveyed and extended. No,
Yeah.
so how that natural overflowing will take different forms that may feel for us like overwhelming or even aggressive, but not losing sight that from which source this is coming, which is the intention of the source, so to say. No, so
Yeah. Yeah.
at one point, the form that it takes will be in one sense secondary, as long as it is coming from that source and we can appreciate it as such, basically, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm. So thank you, Patrick, for your
Thank
words,
you. Yeah.
thoughts, and I don't know if you would like to share any conclusion, any final thoughts, something that you may like to share that we forgot to talk about, or anything that comes to your mind to give grand finale to
Yeah.
the
This seems
meeting.
like, I think you did it. This was such a grand finale to talk about opposition fueling growth. I'm grateful for the whole conversation. I'm grateful to Jeff Long for introducing us.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to more conversations in the future and visiting you in North Carolina.
Yeah, that's my pleasure.
Yeah.
That's my hope
Yeah.
as well. So thank you so much, Patrick. And again, I will share again the link for those who would like to know more about Patrick's work. Here it is again. For those who are listening only, it's reunionstudios.com. So one more time, thank you very much.
Yeah.
And next episode, still I'm about to confirm the exact date, but probably it will be in 10 days because of the availability of the guest. And the guest will be Adam Bucco. So he's a Christian priest. This month of September, I'm inviting different practitioners from various traditions. And Adam Bucco is the one who co-authored the book of New Monasticism with Rory McKenty, who came recently to my podcast. So probably I will be sharing the news soon, but probably we'll be talking with him on September 26th, which will be on Tuesday at 10 a.m. EDT time, but I will be confirming it soon. And the title of our episode most probably will be "Let Your," in connection to what we were just talking with Patrick. Let your heartbreak be your guide. No?
Ooh,
And that's in connection to a book that Adam published recently. So we'll be
wonderful.
talking there on the role of compassion and social activism that he is quite engaged with in connection to prayer, among other different topics. So that will be our next episode. So anyhow, thank you so much to you, Patrick, again. Thank you so much for all
Yeah.
the ones connected. And well, hope to see you very soon.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.